It's a poem that I found in a long-forgotten periodical that was publishing communist poets in the 1930s called Alcestis Quarterly. Who cares? But that's it, 1936. Here we go. It's a ballad, rhymed, meter, in a modern poetry course? What the Close here thine eyes, O state. These are thy guests who bring to gods with appetites grown great a votive offering. Know that they dare defy the words of law and priest. Better to let the unborn die than starve while others feast. The stricken flesh may be outraged and heal, but mind, pain sharpened, may yet learn to see thee plain, O state. Be blind. Warning, the last quatrain might be hard to hear. It might be hard to listen to. We're not going to not read it, but I just want to warn people. Accept love's fruit. Be sleek, fat-lipped, fat and lip-sealed. Forget that life-avenging pain will speak. Thrust deep the long curette. Okay, you have the distant reading. Do you want to say something about the large significance of this poem? We need a microphone. Yeah.
Yes, but it's not.
You have to turn it on.
Wait.
Yep, you're good.
Yes. So why distant reading first? Anyway, well, it's like written 90 years ago, right? Like from now. And I think it still has maybe some significance even like in the contemporary times. Like we're still like discussing over like abortion and this kind of stuff. And I think there is something like more than about this poem, like even though it's like all very like ordered, it's meters, it's rhyming, like I feel like it can be a little bit of like the meta quality that I don't know, that is still like calling to us. Like for example, like in the last line, is this like a close reading? But I don't know. like when she says thrust deep the long curate, like when she's using this kind of like straight addressing to you, it's kind of like pushing some stress, pushing some like force onto the readers. Yes, and it has kind of this feeling. It's just like Dickinson when she says a loaded gun, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Snaps for me, for sure. That's really amazing. You're saying, we're going to turn to Sophia in a second for a close reading. You're saying that it's metapoetic for two reasons, I think. One is by calling attention to itself as a formal and maybe even old-fashioned poem in these new-fashioned times. The depression, the homelessness, the problem of women in the 1930s and the 2020s of not being able to get the kind of care they need in order to choose to bring a child into the world at a point when it was impossible to feed that child for many people. That the formality of it is calling attention to itself as maybe a churchly ballad, right? Or as maybe a kind of old-fashioned statement. It's hiding almost like in a Trojan horse way. It's hiding into that traditional churchly ballad by getting into the church and saying, go ahead, priests and law, government, make my day. Like make me have a back alley abortion, okay? Thrust deep the long curette. And it's calling attention to itself. And the other way in which it's metapoetic, you're suggesting, is embodied in that last line, where the poem is actually doing something that's part of the violence by commanding us readers or the law or priests and the doctors to go ahead and thrust deep, which is a violation amidst this traditional verse. Wow. Sophia, close reading?
I'm thinking about the the title, Lines for an Abortionist Office, lines being like the cue of an actual office, but also the lines of the poem. Here, like lines for
Another
the
meta.
office. Yeah,
Another
which
meta.
yeah. And I've every time I encounter this poem, I think, why did it need to be a ballad? And I appreciate what was just said about the formal decision. And I think the rhyming is really important because it's procedural in the same way that it's circling around this like difficult procedure of the content of the poem. But the formal capacity to have this procedural element with the rhymes makes you think, are we moving forward or are we mimicking like previous decision-making schemes which caused these problems to begin with and caused this outrage and caused this panic? Yeah, so I was thinking about the rhymes in the poem.
Terrific. Thank you. Lainey, I'm just going to say something and ask you to respond in any way you like to what I say or what's been said just now. And then we're going to turn to the Leanne Brown poem. And I would urge people to call us at 610-616-3208. And as an inducement, the next caller is going to receive a copy, not only of Ian Morrison's book, but also The Difference is Spreading. 2 books are coming to you if you make the call. Sophia's Hall's like, I'm calling now. I want the... Okay, Lainey, when I first started teaching this poem in 1985, I had been doing some research on communist poets, and I found this poem, and I thought, boy, we should... And it was a course that was English 88, which is the forerunner of ModPo. So that's how many years ago? Almost 40. Abortion was available and legal in every state of the Union of the United States. And so reading this poem felt to my students as historical, just as historical and old as the ballad. And they could not identify with the rage, even though they were very cool. I mean, the students were great. There's nothing wrong with the students. They were terrific. But they thought of this as almost archaeological in a poetic sense and also in a political sense. It was old. And here we are in 2024, and as you know, suggested, it is completely relevant to the experience of people today, not just the fact that one has to do crazy and even illegal shit to get the care that you need if you are caring for or if you're concerned about a pregnancy that is either not viable or something that is not going to be good even for the child to be born into the world where you can't feed the child or where, etc., right? This parenthetical, better to let the unborn die than starve while others feast, which seems so irrelevant in 1985, seems very relevant to particularly poor women today. So the poem has come back in a way that's both a great achievement for the poem and a poor achievement for literary history, which should remain history in some cases. That was a rantish statement. Lainey, do you want to respond in any way?
So just to clarify, there was not a question that you're asking.
Yes, I'm just wondering what you'd like to say. If
I'm
anything.
actually feeling really emotional looking at this poem again today, looking at it in recent years where there was a question about women's reproductive rights and where we are today. I honestly just I feel ripped up about it. I mean, yes, the poem is incredibly relevant and important, and the form contrasting with the message also seems important, as other people have said. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say except for it's incredibly painful. Mm-hmm. When you talked about letting the unborn die right now, I also thought about the unborn lives of women not allowed to be themselves when their rights regarding their own bodies are being legislated and removed, and separation of church and state doesn't seem to be a thing that a lot of people want to acknowledge in this country.
Yeah. Thank you, Lainey. Appreciate that. We're going to turn to someone on the phone and then to Leanne Brown's poem. But just as a concluding thought on this poem, I'm proud of ModPo for being the only place where you can find this poem. The only place. I'm proud of the fact that Ruth Lechlitner is a name of a poet that is uttered by the lips of ModPo people everywhere for 13 years and for 40 years in my course. And I'm not proud of the fact that literary history has erased so many of the so-called communist poets of that period who were writing poems that were perpendicular or orthogonal to the way poetry was moving, and who disregarded the fact that she, like Claude McKay in his sonnet, were using a traditional form in order to make a point that depends on a modernist understanding of form. So here's to Ruth Lechlitner, who was a reviewer and a poet who lived in Putnam County, upstate New York, with her husband Paul, and raised chickens, and barely made a living, and wrote poems that very few people read but should have read. So thank you. Here's to Ruth.